Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of OTT.X Webinars, where we bring you thought-provoking insights from industry-leading experts and executives from all sectors of OTT, streaming, and CTV. My name is Jose Rodriguez, and we are delighted to have you join us today. Today, we are joined by OTT industry experts Colin Dixon, Chief Analyst and Founder of nScreenMedia, and Darren Lepke, Vice President of Product Management at SymphonyAI, for a conversation that examines how AI helps you understand the who, what, and why behind industry-specific trends and the AI capabilities that will be essential to media businesses in 2025 and beyond. In this session, we will explore how AI is currently being used to optimize content engagement and monetization and has become increasingly vital to content strategy. As always, we want this to be a very interactive session with our audience, so we highly encourage that you drop your questions in the Q&A bin throughout the presentation, and our speakers will get to them at the end. Colin, Darren, we're delighted to have you join us today. The virtual stage is all yours, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Jose, and welcome everybody. And I want to welcome you to this. I think is going to be a very engaging discussion. I think there's no topic that has garnered more airtime than AI in media at recent conferences that we've been at, both Darren and I have been at over the last year. And well, I think we're going to shed some light on some real practical applications of the technology this morning. But maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. So I really want to encourage you to enter questions in the Q&A window. I have that open, and I will slot your question in if appropriate as we go, but we have allocated time at the end for us to actually talk to those questions, those specific questions. But I think now it's time for us to meet Darren Lepke. Darren, I've known for many, many years. He's worked at many companies. And so, Darren, give us a quick thumbnail, your recent import to SymphonyAI. We'll talk a little bit about what you're doing there, but give us an idea of where you've been before.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. It's great to see you again. So where I've been neck deep in the premium content industry for the last 20 years, primarily focused on helping content providers and distributors figure out this whole new world of digital distribution with the emergence of the internet and connected devices. I've been working in the trenches, both on the vendor side and on the customer side, building out core infrastructure that enables a lot of the distribution of content over the internet, the monetization of that content via advertising and subscriptions and retail purchases, kind of all over the place between product management, marketing, business development. So most recently, before joining Symphony a couple months ago, I was at Paramount Streaming on the direct-to-consumer side, helping build platforms and products for many of the trusted brands and channels that we all know and love. And then before that, I was at Verizon. Verizon had a digital media services division for many years that was providing video encoding and delivery infrastructure. And so, like I said, played product and business development roles across those things, but super excited to join SymphonyAI, where we're focusing on what I see, to be the next frontier of premium content distribution around the world.
Very good. So that was almost a mini intro to what's going on in media in the last in the last few years. I can tell you, you could actually have gone a lot further back than that. So because you've been kicking around for quite a while. Well, I think probably a good place for us to start our discussion is to take a look at where the market is today before we delve into the intricacies of the market and the details of how AI is really beginning to influence. So why don't we start, Darren? Let's start with the money. Where is the money? And we at nScreenMedia have gotten into the habit of sort of tracking the money, particularly in North America. This is the US TV revenue market for 2023. And as you can see, quite a large total, 221 billion. And I think the thing to sort of take away from this slide is, although digital is beginning to certainly be a major influence on the media market, there's still a lot of money locked up in traditional television that is that is going to switch ultimately into the digital domain. You can see there's $80 billion still sitting in people's subscription fees to pay television, and 60 billion in traditional TV ads. Interestingly, the transactional market is still present. It's a little bit smaller than it was, but it's still there, about $5 billion, $6 billion still in that business. And I expect to see most of that physical sales number transfer into digital. So it's pretty much been holding its own from well, over the last several years as things have transitioned. But as you can see, if this slide would just stay static for just 1 second, as you can see, there is already almost $60 billion in the digital market. And I expect to see about $10 to $12 billion change from the traditional market into the digital market over the coming year. And just to give you some numbers, one of the things that's not represented there because it's buried in the CTV advertising number is fasts. Fasts have really come on a lot over the last few years. And according to industry data from Kantar, about 51%, 52% of us are now using some fast service like Tubi or Pluto TV or Samsung TV Plus every week. So these are very, very important services and growing, I note. If you want to check out how much, just come to the nScreenMedia website. We've got plenty of information on the growth in that market. So it's a very interesting, vibrant market, still in transition, Darren. But in a way, my slide oversimplifies things because it makes it seem like it's still a relatively simple market. It is anything but simple for content providers, right?
Yeah, that's true. So where you saw the $220 billion in revenue, that was, the revenue that the distributors were collecting directly from consumers via subscriptions or directly from advertisers who are buying into that market for that attention, right? But the world of content providers is also very robust and very complicated. You have traditional broadcasters and networks who are selling their channels and their local stations into traditional TV and virtual MVPD for their linear, regular over-the-air cable, as well as digital offerings. You have film and television providers who are looking at theatrical windows, premium VOD, as VOD opportunities for their first-run content. You have other film and television providers, whether Hollywood or independent, looking at, secondary windows for content distribution for SVOD, AVOD. We talked about FAST a little bit. Digital and EST is a small but, important part of that pie, along with, the emerging CTV platforms like Samsung, Vizio, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and more, right? So there's all of those opportunities for content providers to, in some ways take a chunk of that $220 billion that are coming into distributors. While at the same time, content providers are also analyzing what it would take to become a distributor themselves. The traditional moat for distributors has crumbled with the emergence of the internet. It used to be very expensive to have a new cable company or spin up a new broadcast satellite facility. And now with the internet, some of those walls are crumbling, right? So the lines are definitely blurring between who's a distributor or a retailer and who's a content provider these days.
And I think that's one of the biggest shifts that I've seen over the last couple of years is that there was tremendous focus on owned and operated solutions.
Yeah.
And now really, I think vendors of both platforms and content providers have realized that they can't exist on one model or one outlet, right? That's one of the biggest changes over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen the growing pains of that expansion in both directions, right? You find distributors who are getting into the content business and not always having great success. And we've certainly seen the impact to share prices of major studios who are trying to do a direct-to-consumer offering and now in some ways being punished for not being profitable while they figure out how to be a tech company in addition to a content company. So it's definitely been an interesting time of transition for the industry. While at the same time, we're leaving out a third character from this movie, and that's the advertisers, right?
Yes.
So, traditionally, distributors and advertisers have had a very close relationship. I mean, soap operas emerged because distributors and advertisers wanted to work together to sell soap to housewives during the day. So, obviously, going back to the very early origins of television, advertisers and distributors have been very close. And and for advertisers today who represent brands who are trying to reach audiences, there's more opportunities than ever, right? There are still your traditional television buys that you can do. You can now have access to audiences on virtual MVPDs, connected device platforms like Samsung and Vizio we mentioned, digital streamers, Netflix. Almost every single SVOD service is now a hybrid service that also offers an ad tier. So that's another way to reach potential consumers. And then the aforementioned direct-to-consumer offerings from content providers. Not to mention the kind of emerging digital landscape of YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. So, I think the key takeaway from this overview is that it's definitely a complex marketplace that we're all dealing with. It's definitely one in transition, but I would say still growing and evolving in ways that are very, very exciting.
Yeah, one of the most exciting things I think for the advertisers is that digital platforms, in theory at least, 100% of the inventory is addressable. And it is far more deterministic, but as we'll get to in a little bit, that may not be that may be a double-edged sword.
Right.
So actually, maybe we should talk. Let's talk a little bit about this content. And we've always said in the past that content is king. And I don't know, your description of the marketplace really makes me begin to wonder, is that still true?
Yeah, I think that's a great question that we all have to ask ourselves, right? That's been kind of the proven or kind of given maxim throughout Hollywood and the world, is that he who owns the content IP rules the world. And I would say today in the new digital world, in this direct-to-consumer world, I would say that the quote-unquote owners of the end customer and that associated revenue probably have more power than they've ever had in the state of this business. They have more power because there are more platforms and more formats than ever in terms of reaching and building relationships with audiences. It's not just theatrical releases, your first run television and your home video windows. There's all new ways in which content can be distributed and monetized. I would say from a content perspective, the audience is much more fragmented, and a less monolithic audience is not great for advertisers, but it certainly, I would say, has an influence on the cost of content. Like if you have the most popular show in the world and you can guarantee a certain audience for that particular piece of content, if you're a content owner looking to license or that to a distributor, I think you have a little more pricing power when the audience is aggregated, and so that again kind of tips the scale a little bit towards the distributor. I would say there's new ad buying opportunities. It's not just a 30-second television spot anymore. There are new formats like pause ads, kind of shrink back ads. There are new sponsorship opportunities in ways in which television never could innovate or didn't want to. And there's new ways of selling, both the old-fashioned way of selling directly, but also new programmatic marketplaces, right? So there's a lot that's going on that's kind of tipping the scale towards the distributors. And I would say maybe most importantly is that the content providers themselves no longer own the market for content creation. Many distributors are becoming content providers, like Netflix, and their original content is core to their strategy. I would say that we're even seeing some advertisers become content providers. The most probably famous case of that would be Red Bull and all of their content and channels that they've created around their brand, right? So all of that is certainly kind of increasing the tension and competition in the marketplace for content providers and their kind of given place as the king.
Yeah, it's become this complexity of platforms has laid in another layer of complexity for advertisers and content providers as well, right? Because all of the platforms have different formats for things like metadata and video and advertising units. All of these things are in different technical specs for each of them. It makes it very challenging, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things that the complexity of the market brings in terms of opportunities, but there's also a lot of challenges too, right? I would say, the asymmetry of data in the world and understanding of what's actually happening with content is another thing that's kind of tipping in favor of the distributor, right? Like the way that you kind of understood value of content and thus kind of priced your content for licensing in the old world of television and movies depended on well-known, well-published metrics in the form of TV ratings. It was in the form of box office results, and today many of those things don't exist in a format that's usable in the digital world. So SVOD and AVOD providers, they do a flat license fee for a movie. There's no kicker for content providers if it's popular or not. And we saw many of those challenges come into the latest round of actor strikes that we got through in the last couple of years. Even the very relationship with the customers is different in this new complex world, right? How you maintain a relationship with a subscriber to an SVOD service is very different from getting somebody out of their seat and into a movie theater. A movie doesn't need to make $300 million in a box office to be valuable to an SVOD provider. So what they're mostly concerned about is churn. Like, what is the likelihood of a user to end their subscription? And for most services, the number one thing that causes people to churn is lack of usage of the service. They look at their monthly bill, they realize, well, I'm paying $20 for Netflix and I don't really use it, so I'm going to turn that off. Well, that affects the content strategy for Netflix and how frequently they release a title versus saving up maybe for one big summer box office hit, right? So combine that with the fact that many of the most popular titles on these streaming services are back catalog shows and sitcoms that have been out of circulation for many years, and it's really thrown a big wrench in how content providers look at and value their content and make a lot of their business decisions.
Yeah, it's made it very challenging. I spent some time with the Netflix engagement report that they're now putting out every 6 months, and I can tell you that what you're saying is absolutely true. There was this old maxim that 80% of the viewing went to 20% of the content, or was it 90% of the viewing to 10%? I forget exactly what it was. I can tell you that's absolutely not true with Netflix. Their originals do garner a lot, and look, the originals sit in the top 10 or 20 played titles on their services. But there's a lot of library content there, and it doesn't just go to things like Suits, which was a huge hit on Netflix last year and earlier this year. It goes to just regular old library titles that have been sitting out there probably for quite some time. The depth of library is equally as important. So yeah, absolutely, I hear what you're saying there. So what are content providers do about it? They've got a lot of options available to them. They can be O&O, they can have their own app, they can license content to other services, they can distribute through a fast service, and they can distribute in linear and SVOD. They can have advertising in their own app. These are a lot of choices. They need data to make these choices, right? But this is one of the areas that we sort of hinted at the beginning of this session. This is one of the areas where there's a lot of asymmetry, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like sometimes having a lot of decisions is not a great thing, right? It used to be as easy as, the head of a studio calling up somebody on Monday morning and asking for the box office totals and knowing if it was a hit or not, right? Looking at the overnight ratings for a TV show. Those things aren't there anymore for folks to look at, or if they are there, it's only one piece of a very complex puzzle that they have to manage as a content provider. Even the data that comes back, I've seen some reports now for fast channels who distribute to platforms, and they don't get back user demographics. They don't get back geography. They get a channel name and they get a total number of hours viewed, and that's about all they get, right? So it's going to take some work on the content provider side to track all the different consumer touch points, to deal with all the the different varying data formats, because of course from one partner to another, from a Roku to a Samsung to a Vizio to YouTube, it's never the same level of details, not in the same format. And it could be solved. Like, direct to consumer is appealing because you'd have that direct relationship with the consumer. In theory, you can have more depth of data and understand like who's interacting with your content and what's working or not. But again, it's direct to consumer is a cost. It's not just as easy as rolling out a bunch of apps and making it work, right? It's a cost perspective. It's an operational know-how, and it's a technical know-how that's required to effectively operate that business in ways that studios and programmers never had to.
I think this is the single issue that I hear most from content providers, Darren, particularly the smaller ones, that they feel like they're not getting enough feedback, particularly from the fast platforms. They're just not getting enough data to do an effective job at managing their channels, programming the right content for those channels to boost their popularity, for example. There's just not enough information that they're getting back from those platforms. This is a really tough situation, and I don't know, it's very difficult to advise these providers on what to do, right?
Yeah, well, look, I don't envy you in that advisory role. Like, we talk with a lot of customers every day as well at SymphonyAI, but like you, we believe in the importance of the data itself, right? Because at the core of it, in this new modern complex world, data is really a core part of that story, and there are some additional costs that come with managing data and making it work, right? Like dealing with all of the different sources of data, getting it normalized, building the tools and reports to do that, costs money, and it requires a dedicated investment. This isn't something that can be an afterthought or something that's kind of a nice to have. But if they don't have that view coming in of the performance of their content, like, they can't really get a clear picture of the revenue. We've seen many cases where you see a usage report come back, and these partners are kind of reporting on how much was viewed, and then you actually go and look at the books and dig a little deeper into the logs, and you find some discrepancies in actual viewing versus what the content owners were paid for. And so without having a clear view of that data all the way through the full extent of their contractual obligations, then you may be leaving revenue on the table. And so, like, cost and revenue are the two basic components of business. Yep. So they're obviously super important, but beyond that, like, understanding content, at the kind of the next macro level, like understanding what content you need to license, what audiences you're trying to target and build content for, like, all of that doesn't exist if you don't have a strong data platform. And then beyond that, it's just the existential questions that data help you answer as a content provider, really. Like, what are we doing here? How are we going to make our brand? How are we going to value our content? Like, all of those things start with a very robust data strategy.
Yeah, I mean, this really harks back to, we talked about the many options that content providers have in distributing their content, and advertisers have in advertising to those viewers. Yeah. There are so many different options. I mentioned there the technical specification of being on those platforms is different. the technical specification of the data, the format of the data is different from pretty much everybody, right? So getting this unified, normalized picture of the data, I think probably must be the number one need for content providers in today's multi-distribution world, right?
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think it's the number one challenge for everybody. Like even when I was at Paramount, we were on the distribution side where, again, we owned all the instrumentation of the apps and all of the signals coming back from purchases and viewing and all of that. Like it was still a large lift to, keep the apps updated, keep the specs and analytics flowing into your data lakes, extracting meaning out of that. Even when you're in a data-rich environment, is something that takes time and effort. Again, it just doesn't happen magically. You have to be intentional about it. So on the content provider side, where you're in a little bit of a data desert and you don't even get as much data, it's more important to really value the data that you have, number one. So you have to bring it in. And then for the data that you're not given or handed, you have to find ways to augment and enrich that data, either through additional first-party sources. So if you have a customer relationship management system, if you have a content catalog with additional information about your content, whether it be genre or geographical distribution or things like that can help inform and enrich context. That's super important. We're seeing a lot of interest in finding and kind of recreating the world of TV ratings through third parties, right? I think I heard recently an effort to get all the content providers together and kind of pool their data and create this new version of a rating source amongst themselves. But I don't know if that'll work. I think that the platforms will not want people sharing their performance data in public. And so we'll really have to, continue to look to folks like Nielsen. I know Nielsen's trying to provide a more unified view of performance across the market, but there's also, other providers like ACR providers who can, give some insight into what's actually happening in living rooms in ways that they couldn't do that before. So, that's something we're actively doing for sure at SymphonyAI is, helping our customers with our core software platform, some additional services to go out and actually, in some cases, collect the data for them and bring it all together. The core of our business has actually been around for, SymphonyAI is a relatively newer company. It's based in Palo Alto, 3,000 people, $500 million in revenue. So it's a growing private company. But the media division that I operate in has been in the audit business for 20 years now. So we acquired a company that has a longstanding relationship with content providers, specifically a lot of linear networks and broadcasters who hire us to audit their MVPD distribution agreements. We're starting to see some of that auditing service come into digital world as well for fast channels, TVOD as well. So you can leverage an outside company like ours, but in some cases, the content providers themselves still have to, build a strong team. They have to have somebody on the other side of the phone who's, telling the story and interpreting the data and providing it to the decision makers in their companies. And maybe most important and final thing is like, if you are a content provider, you start to, the emergence of new technologies like AI really becomes a legitimate path for staff augmentation, right? Like you want to build a strong team, you need to have people in place, but you're never going to have enough bodies and brains there to do all the work you need to do in the way they want to do it. So leveraging new technologies like AI to automate many of the things that a human has to do today, I think is going to be a big accelerator of this kind of data picture for content providers moving forward.
This is one of the areas that I think is most exciting for the application of artificial intelligence, right? I think I can't think of a better application than plowing through all of this data, helping canonize it, unify it, normalize it, and translate that data into useful information. Give us an example. You did some really interesting things with titles, right? This is
Yeah.
sounds like such a trivial issue, but it turns out, and I documented this with many content providers.
Yeah.
This is not trivial. This is hard to do. So tell us
Yeah.
about that.
It's so funny because, when we talk about AI, we think about Terminator 2 and the robots coming and taking over the world. And not to be serious, I know this is a serious topic, but obviously AI generated content replacing filmmakers and screenwriters is, a huge, huge issue for folks.
It
And
is.
perhaps those two things will happen in the future. Let's hope not. But, really AI is having a meaningful impact today on costs and efficiency in small but important ways, right? You mentioned title matching. So, let's go back to some of the challenges we talked about with reporting and getting data from a distribution partner for these content providers. The reports that they send back to content providers to tell them how much a show was watched or how much a movie was purchased is based on the title and the asset name that's stored in the distributor catalog, not in the content provider. The content provider creates a contract. We say, hey, here's the shows we're going to license to you. But ultimately, they deliver the digital files or the assets to the distributor. They ingest them however they need. They have their own set of naming conventions. And believe me, as the guy who ran the CMS at Paramount, like it gets complicated in ways that I don't even want to describe in order to make things work in a consumer application, right? So when that comes back in the form of a report with not a lot of context and not a lot of detail, maybe not even the appropriate ID space, you have to rely on looking at the title to understand what was actually being reported on, so that you can accurately track to your revenue. So today, that happens by leveraging well-trained content curation staff, either at vendors or in the business, and it's a full-time job for people to go through and interpret, Game of Thrones season 1, episode 2. Like, what does that really mean? How does that really map back to an asset in our catalog? So today, we have a title matching solution that we're leveraging with AI, where we take that title name from that field in the report. We break it apart into its kind of core components. We feed it into a large language model that's been trained on the asset catalog from the content provider. And it kind of comes back with a best guess of, here's what I think this actually means based on what I know of the format of this title and what I know of your catalog. And then from there, we can run it against a search of that asset catalog, and we're getting pretty good matches. It's having a meaningful impact on productivity for a lot of our customers in ways that allows them. I'm not saying it's going to eliminate jobs, but it allows people within those companies, in those growing data teams, to spend their time on more meaningful things like analysis rather than data cleanup.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to hark back on you mentioned the auditing function. I think people should really take this function very seriously. We mentioned that there are many different sources that companies now are bringing together for their metadata. And I can tell you that I have talked to several companies that when they did do an audit, they discovered that they were paying for the same information multiple times, not just once or twice, but more than once or twice. Yeah. And they didn't find that out until they did an audit. And that's when that turned up, that issue. But that title search is a great example. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about how AI is helping some of the other struggles we talked about, optimizing distribution. I mean, goodness, how do you know which is the right outlet, the right distribution mechanism for your content? What content should you buy? What content should you create? And right. And how you go about I talked about programming. It's not just programming a channel, it's programming your service, right? You've got to curate that content and make sure you have the right content available.
Yeah. So, as we're talking about content providers, we're not specifically talking about recommendation engines today, right? That's more the domain of the content distributors who are having some of these real-time decisions being made on behalf of customers. We're really talking about content strategy and licensing strategy, right? So, Today we have a Copilot, which is built into our interface. Again, using that same large language model, programmed against the content catalog. And we can enable analysts who are in the platform to ask some questions, and have the LLM do the synthesis and analysis in ways that used to take hours and hours, right? Back at Paramount, when I was working there, we were on the hook to meet with our brand customers every month and to tell them what was going on with their service. And we had a full-time analyst whose job it was to get in the database, to run models, to train models, to generate reports, to drop it into Excel, to generate graphs, to put it into a PowerPoint deck, and then go and make a presentation to the content heads based on what was going on, right? And so with this Copilot functionality, many of those steps that a person has to do today can now be done by simply entering a question into a prompt. Our current version is mostly text-based, so it can even be for an executive who wants a quick answer on the latest run of the data. But we see evolutions of that Copilot coming in the future, where we can also generate those graphics, those charts and graphs that again take hours and hours of work to do, but can free up that time to really work on more important things. So Copilot is another great example. Some of it is also very boring. Like, we have a lot of customers who say, hey, I just need to see a flag or some sort of level of alerting when we see a precipitous decline in a particular channel or piece of content, right? And some of it may be a data issue. Some of it may actually mean people stop watching a show. Maybe, something else happened, but, identifying those variances and setting alerts is something that is very well suited for AI or machine learning tool set. And that's something we can bring to the table that, again, is boring and it doesn't seem all that sexy. It's not writing movies, but it is having a meaningful impact on the cost and the efficiency of our customers. And that's ultimately what we're here to do.
Right. We often think about AI helping us with things like personalization, but the same general techniques can be used to help with the distribution as well, right? Because you can say, well, I have a piece of content that's doing extremely well in a fast channel.
Yeah.
Do I have any other pieces of content similar to this that I can program next, right? It's that sort of question that AI seems to be uniquely suited to answering.
Yeah, and I think I agree. Our reporting and forecasting capabilities today will continue to evolve to help answer more of those questions. But again, it becomes a question of normalization and centralization, right? If we can pull in more data from the organization, maybe from a marketing engine or other CRM systems, we can start to not only answer what's doing well and where, but why, right? Did this show actually get a boost because we made a marketing investment and we had a promotion and we were running a special? Did we have a 2-for-1 purchase on VOD titles? Did we offer a $5 discount on our SVOD service? Those kinds of events can also be captured and brought in and normalized with the data to provide even more insights than we're getting today. And that's really, when I think about why I jumped back into the vendor fray from my lofty perch over at Paramount, answering those kind of questions and diving into those experiments and really getting hands-on with the data and solving those problems is really number one, super exciting for me, but number two, I think really where the future of the media industry is going to have to look and invest, right? I think we're past the days of 4K video or 3D video or virtual reality moving the needle with consumers. And I think it's going to be more in this digital domain and decision-making around content that ultimately will have the biggest effect on profitability for these businesses. So that's why I'm super excited to be part of an amazing team at Symphony that's tackling these kind of challenges.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go to all audience questions in just a minute, so please enter your questions in the Q&A window, and we'll get to those in just a second. I just want to talk just for a second about the creation cycle. This can be equally, maybe even more money saving, money optimizing in the creation cycle, right? I was listening to Anjali Sud, who's she was formerly head of Vimeo, and she's now moved over
Tubi, right?
to run Tubi.
Yeah.
And she was talking about the fact that they noticed some vampire show that they'd licensed was doing extremely well, and that what they couldn't find in their catalog or anywhere else was similar shows. And so they decided to invest and create new episodes of that show, get the cast back together and create new episodes of that show. That's an interesting example, but the problem is that it's really difficult to scale that approach, right, with just humans. Right. Doing the investigation. You can't look at every piece of content. You know, evaluate what's making it successful, where it's successful, right, and then be looking for content that's similar to that you can run next to it. And this seems to be, again, this very unique facet of AI that allows us to process this vast amount of data and get answers to these very difficult to answer questions.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the importance of a brand and knowing your customer, knowing your viewer, right? I mean, it seems like an obvious example, and you know, seems like a tough one to answer for a very broad service provider like a Netflix or a Disney, who has to appeal to many audiences, right? But certainly for folks to the kind of medium, smaller end of the spectrum, the folks who are you know, really looking at a niche audience and kind of a niche buyer for their advertising partners. I can't think of anything more important than leveraging some of these insights to really help round out and develop not only who their customers are and what they like, but also what they want to watch next, right? Tubi's done a great job with that. Criterion Collection knows that they're there to service, you know, cinephiles, right? And for everybody else who's you know, rolling out their own fast channel, or you know, considering you know, spinning up a vertical or kind of a genre-based solution, like, it feels like this is kind of have to be table stakes moving forward in order to compete in a very fractured and very competitive market.
Indeed. Okay, so let's jump to Q&A. First of all, if there was a question about if these slides, well, I guess they probably just want that pie chart. So what I'll do, I'll drop my email in the chat in just a second, and you can just send me an email and I'll send it to you. But why don't we take a couple of the questions down? And I guess the first question that I think is a really interesting one. Your solution is called Revedia, right? And we've talked a lot about processing this data. It's very data intense. You talked about data lakes. How scalable is the solution? Somebody's asking how scalable that solution is.
I don't know how to call it very. I don't have the metrics for you today to share, but I can tell you that for many of our customers, you know, including our audit customers from linear broadcast channels, you know, we're dealing with hundreds of thousands of records every month in the reporting that we get, right? And so in the grand scheme of data platforms, you know, our space is probably a little more constrained than, say, you know, an analytics service that I was building at Paramount, where we're dealing with, you know, billions of data elements per day. But you know, I will say that today we're seeing the kind of performance we expect in terms of ingest time. You know, we're leveraging a lot of the core technology platforms that SymphonyAI provides. So we, as the media team, are, you know, a relatively small group within the overall organization. But, you know, one of the exciting things about SymphonyAI is they have a core Eureka AI engine, which is shared across divisions, right? So Revedia is the, you know, industry-specific platforms that we've purpose-built for content providers, and it scales in terms of storage and ingest and processing and analysis to an appropriate degree for our customers. But we also have this very powerful AI engine that we don't have to build from scratch, that we didn't have to make the investment on. We're building on and standing on the shoulders of, the investments made in many of the other divisions at Symphony, whether that be industrial or healthcare or enterprise IT. So for us, we're trying to encourage as much data as possible from our customers to come in, because the more data we have, the more we can clean up and the more insights we can generate.
Very good. And another question, can all the different FAST platforms survive? This is maybe for both of us. What do you think?
The answer is no, but I can give a qualified no. I'd like to hear your opinion.
So short answer is no, I don't think so. There are too many. I think one of the things that's going to happen, we have too many general platforms. There's no question that there are too many general ones. I think what we will see is an evolution towards where there are more niche oriented. So for example, Fubo is creating a sports focused FAST. Which it says it will open up to everybody and not just to subscribers. So I think we'll see that happen, but the bottom line is no. The market can't support many different FAST services.
I think it'll be like Premier League soccer, right? Like you'll see some get relegated every year. Your Chelsea team will be safe because you have the investment of very wealthy owners, and you'll be fine at the top of the table. My Everton will be scraping the bottom every year, trying to get by, and may find itself getting demoted. And but other teams will emerge. The league will still be there. The content will still be available for consumers. So the job is to make sure that you're getting the right data and insights to help your business grow and stay at the top of the table.
Very good. And one more question. Somebody was asking about, could you give a little bit more detail on the title matching? How does that really work?
Again, it's a multi-step process, right? So you take the title string, literally from the report that says here's the asset we're reporting on. You break it apart using LLM. So we feed it into an LLM and say, here's this string. Please tell me what this means to the best of your ability. And so the LLM will decompose that title string into what it predicts to be, the most likely components of a title to be matched to a database of assets that's been preloaded. So we kind of preload the customer CMS into our system. We give a confidence score that says, we decompose the title, we get it into its relative elements, and then we put that against the search engine and get a confidence score to say, here's what we think this title is, here's what we think the ID is. And we have, settings that our customers can use. So if the title matching, AI-powered title matching thinks that it's 90% confident that it has the right title, then you can set a threshold and say, automatically just match that title, put it into the database, load the data. If it falls below a certain threshold, you can put it into an exceptions queue, which somebody can review who understands, and they can decide to accept the match, they can reject it, they can make a manual edit. There's a whole series of potential use cases for what you might want to do with an exception to the title match that hopefully makes the job of title matching easier.
Very good. And maybe the last question we'll deal with, because we're just about out of time here, is where is AI having the greatest impact in the video ad lifecycle, and what about the future? So what do you think?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? I think today AI is having a meaningful impact on the blocking and tackling of the data business, helping with kind of core efficiencies around data processing, data cleanliness, data normalization. In the future, we'll see, right? I think, having lived through enough, life-changing technological innovations, we talked about 3D video, we talked about virtual reality. I mean, Segway scooters at one point was supposed to change the world. What about in the future? What will AI impact? I don't know. I would say I think it's a meaningful technology in ways that will make people more productive. Whether or not it truly replaces humans or truly replaces human creativity remains to be seen.
Well, I'll throw a couple of things out there as well, Darren. I think the areas that we've been talking in today, which is in the optimization of content distribution and content spend, these are practical areas today where it is making a big impact, and where companies, SymphonyAI has a great solution. There are other solutions. This is just a very rich area where you really can optimize monetization and optimize your content spend. And the area that I think is most fascinating for me going forward is how we can optimize the user experience by doing a much better job in advertising. I think one of the things, there are two sort of axes that I see going on with the advertising. One is if we can support continue to support very low ad loads with higher CPMs, that is good for everybody, right? It's good for the advertiser, it's good for the viewer, and it's good for the content creator, because everybody gets paid and everybody's happy. And I think AI is beginning to really help do things there, like, for example, making ads more contextual. So when an ad drops in, it's not jarring, it's not taking you completely away from the context. So that's one area. Another area is innovating in the user interface and the user experience itself. So coming up with new ad formats and making those ad formats more interactive and less disruptive to the experience. I think those things are things that really excite me going forward. But I think we're just about out of time here, Darren. I want to thank everybody for their attention. I forgot to enter my email into the chat. You can email me at colin@nScreenMedia.com. That's Colin with one L rather. Darren, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing your experience, your industry experience with us today.
Thank you, Colin. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, everybody. And I don't know if we're passing back to Jose, but if not, thank you all for your time. Here comes Jose. Welcome back.
Hey, Colin, Darren, thank you so much, guys. A very fascinating and pertinent conversation, especially as AI and its solutions become more and more prominent in our industry and world. So thank you. We really appreciate it. We'd like to remind everyone that this session was recorded and will be available for viewing on demand at OTT.X.org. If you would like to hear more insights from Darren or Colin, Darren will be speaking at the Future of Video Summit on November 20th in Marina del Rey on the Generative AI Production, Personalization, and Monetization panel. So right on cue with our topic here today. And Colin will be joining us next Wednesday, November 13th for the next OTT.X Bus session, which will also feature leading industry experts and pundits from Greenfield Media, Here Media, My Bundle TV, nScreenMedia, Omdia, and StreamVantage. I'm sure Colin has a lot of great topics up for discussion for that session. We hope you guys will be able to join us. That wraps it up for us here today. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great day. Darren, Colin, thank you so much. Have a great day, guys.